Lawyers and police officers of Reddit, what is the dumbest reason you've seen someone get arrested?
Silent scan.
In the 1980s, I was a detective in Cape Town. One day while driving in Woodstock, we saw a group of people chasing a man, so we assisted. Turned out he was suspected of stealing from a passenger in a third-class train carriage. Those are very crowded with many passengers standing close together. In his pocket he had a pay envelope from a local fish packing place, containing no money, but a piece of carton in which was written, "Haha, lekker jevang, Afrikaans for lol caught you, good." The people giving chase insisted that he had pickpocketed someone on the train, and jumped out at Woodstock station. Long story short, we traced the owner of the pay envelope. His name and employee number were on the envelope, who said that after being pickpocketed twice before and losing a week's wages, he hid his money in his sock, and made a decoy with the top of a pack of 30 cigarettes, on which he wrote the Afrikaans taunt. The culprit was convicted of theft of an envelope valued at 15 cents, and ended up with a criminal record. Can't recall what the sentence was, unfortunately. I'd love to hear what reason for his conviction he told his fellow inmates. I stole an envelope.
Silent scan.
Someone in my town crashed into a telephone pole and took out the power. The road was closed off while things were sorted out. One lady decided she couldn't take the long way home and crashed into the same telephone pole. She was arrested for drunk driving. Drunk on stupidity. There was no internet. What was she supposed to do?
Silent scan.
Not me, but when my husband was arrested. He was out on his boat fishing and forgot his life jacket in the truck. Game warden wrote him a ticket, told him he didn't have to appear in court, and to come to the courthouse on the date listed to pay the ticket. Cruel. No big deal. The day came for my husband to pay the ticket. He was in the area for work, so he figured he would pop in instead of driving back out there, about 45-minute drive. He went in to pay the ticket, gave it to the girl so she could process it, and she said, "You can't pay this. There is a warrant out for your arrest." My husband was extremely confused, and no one would say anything to him about what was going on. A 60-year-old sheriff came over and handcuffed him. While the sheriff was walking him across the road to the jail, he finally explained it to my husband. There was a warrant out because he failed to appear in court. Remember, the game warden said he didn't have to appear in court, and even checked on the ticket that he did not have to appear. My husband told the sheriff that, and the sheriff knew. He also knew this particular game warden. According to the sheriff, this was not the first time this had happened. I ended up bailing him out and he was on probation for a year.
Silent scan.
I was on a ride-along. Guy gets pulled over, hands his brother's ID to the officer. It is not a good match. Officer asks him when he was born. He gets that one right. Asks him how old he is. He's off by 2 years. He's being put in the car and the officer says, "You're the first guy I've arrested for bad math. When's your birthday?" 22nd of February. What year? Every year.
Silent scan.
Work for a small county. Last fall we got a group of people coming me down from a nearby city to rob a hemp farm, thinking it was weed growing along the highway. Several of the crack team of bandits were arrested and lodged. The kicker is it was explained explicitly how dumb it was, that you can't even get high of this stuff, but the very next weekend they came back down and tried to pull it off again. Only this time the farmer was home and ended up holding them all at gunpoint till we arrived. Man, I love me some farmer justice.
Silent scan.
Not me, but my grandma was a lawyer. She had to defend someone who stole from a store in a city in Hungary around midnight. The only reason they got caught was because they used some matches to light up the place, and that set the fire alarm off. As if that wasn't enough, a few weeks later in court, my grandma tells the judge to look at the kid, how young he was, and that he couldn't have been strong enough to break open the door or carry something outside and steal it. At this point the defendant stands up, points at his muscles, and shouts, "Hell yeah, I could." That's basically when my grandma gave up. As far as I know, he got a few months in prison.
Silent scan.
I was a seasonal officer at a beach resort. One day I was stuck in the substation working on a bunch of reports when I hear another seasonal officer and a senior officer get dispatched to a hotel for unknown reasons. 2 hours later and I'm still doing paperwork. In fairness, I took a break for lunch, and both of the officers come in with arms full of large brown paper evidence bags, like the 2 feet tall ones you out groceries in. They start pulling out the most varied amount of drugs I've seen ever. Something like 2 large vacuum bags of good weed, not the dry shit, 2 pages of LSD tabs, a gallon bag of shrooms, and a bunch more. Apparently this 19-year-old had come to the beach to deal. He had paid for a few nights at this hotel. Well, he missed his checkout time, and the hotel needed the room, so the housekeeper let herself. She undid the covers and found this buffet of drugs. The kid ended up showing up while the officers were searching his hotel room and they got him.
Silent scan.
Not a cop or a lawyer, but I knew a guy in high school who got arrested for impersonating a police officer and pulling over a real-life off-duty cop who also happened to know him from high school and found him pretty easily because of that. I never understood why people do this. What is the purpose of pretending to be a cop? Does it give them some sort of power trip or something? Usually, they were rejected from the police academy for being too power hungry, so they try to make up for it by pretending that they didn't get kicked out. There's also the people who use it as a way to steal things, much like someone waiting until you go on vacation to break in and steal your shit. They just go up to you and pretend to be a cop and steal your SHT.
Silent scan.
I'm from a small town, and once this stupid guy decides to rob one of the small grocery stores in town. This idiot apparently didn't have a car, as he decides his getaway transport would be a train, as the train station is close. Keep in mind, this is a small town where a train comes by every 30 minutes, so not the best idea for a quick escape. Well, the grocery store calls the police, who have no problem finding this guy. Why? The train station is literally on the other side of the road from the grocery store. He was taught to reduce his carbon footprint.
Silent scan.
Back in my first year of uni, a guy in halls who was the biggest druggie ever got super high and called the police because someone in his flat has lots of drugs and was selling them. A long time back, this guy I'd known for a long time and rolled with before invited us to his house to candy flip. We went, and it was me, my best friends who were a couple, and then the guy's girlfriend. We were having a great time, but the guy was acting really weird, giving me a really bad feeling. He was mumbling about crazy stuff about when he was in the army and needing a man in uniform. Then his roommate got home and he just started losing it, telling us all we needed to leave. The couple just wanted to ignore it, but I got my shoes on and told them we were leaving. The roommate called us a cab, and we were waiting on the porch when 2 police cars rolled up. This dude had called 911 and told them he was being held against his will in his own house. The roommate talked to the cops and just said we'd been drinking, and the guy was having a meltdown. That's when our cab pulled up and the cops let us go. The walk to the cab was so long, and I kept expecting the cops to stop us, but we got in and rode away. That was the most terrified I have ever been.
Silent scan.
Lawyer. Client was arrested because he got drunk one night, headed home, forgetting he had just moved out of this particular house. Confused when his key didn't work, but too drunk to realize his mistake. Smashed a window to get in, ate some chips, then realized his mistake when he noticed all the furniture that wasn't his. He was charged with break and enter and larceny for eating the chips.
Silent scan.
I'm a firefighter, and I was at a fire arson domestic violence kind of scene. Dude piled all his all-ladies stuff in and around the fireplace and set it all on fire. He was with the cops after we had put out the fire and was explaining the situation. He told the cop he was intending to burn up her stuff and burn down the house. The cop patiently explained to him that setting her stuff on fire in a fireplace was one thing, but trying to burn down an occupied house was something completely different, and would the gentleman like to clarify and possibly revise his statement. The guy repeated that he was trying to both burn up the stuff confined to the fireplace and also to burn the house down with them in it. The cop explained again the difference between the two offenses and again requested clarification, but our hapless offender stood by his story. At this point, the officer read a short statement from a card he carried in his pocket and then requested a much more official and legally binding version from the resident. Said resident patiently and obstinately explained that he was trying to burn down the house and all the stuff, and couldn't be more clear in his explanation if the officer wouldn't listen to him. I got called on the case a couple times, and the guy ended up with 12 years in the Florida prison system. Maybe possibly PMITA prison, but probably just regular old play cards, and wonder why cops are stupid prison. Was wondering how someone could be so stupid until I read Florida prison system.
Silent scan.
Not my story, but my grandfather's. Faintly remember, so some details will be left out. It was around the 1970s in New Hampshire. My grandpa responded to robbery, and when they got there, no one was there, so they started to investigate the scene. When they went around back and saw a guy in all black just chillin' digging through the trash, and asked what he was doing. He said, "I'm looking for my friends," and my grandpa asks him if he needed help finding his friends, and the guy said yes. So not more than 5 minutes later, the guy called out into the woods and had 2 other men in all black come out, and you'll never guess it, but they're the ones that robbed the place and all went to jail because of their dumb friend.
Silent scan.
Not a lawyer, a police officer. A high school friend's brother was arrested for a minor incident. A few days later, he returned to our small town police station during the night and used a knife to flatten the tires of several police cars. It was an easy bust for the police. They followed his foot tracks to his house in the newly fallen snow. Ugh, so dumb.
Silent scan.
I was attending court for work, and I had 2 hours to kill before we had to physically attend our session, so I went into the public gallery for a random case. A man was being trialed by video link and entered a not guilty plea. His charge was assault. Apparently, when he was in Brisbane, Australia at Street Eat, like a food market, where he went up to a male police officer at an ATM and licked his face. That is the dumbest one.
Silent scan.
I can't really recall an exact scenario, but generally it's whenever it's of their own making. We try our hardest when dealing with say a drunk person to not bring them to the drunk tank, but man sometimes they just don't care. There was one guy though who we arrested for breaking and entering a residence and eating some of their food before sleeping in a bed we arrested released on paper. Next night arrested him for the exact same thing in the exact same house. He got held that time. Sounds like a nice house.
Silent scan.
My roommate had a book maybe strange but true, and there was two that I remember. The first one, a man walks into the police station and demands help. It seems he had convinced himself that his brain was not in his head, and to prove this, he drilled into it 7 times with a drill. Number 2, a man in his 80s stabbed his wife with Parmesan cheese in the neck, killing her. When asked why, he claimed that he kept telling her not to put the cheese in front of the odge, because he always had to pull out the cheese to get to the juice, and you use the juice more than the cheese. How on earth do you stab someone with cheese?
Silent scan.